Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be working on some VFX and kind of starting to dive into Fusion a little bit. If you want to follow along, you can open up this project 4B VFX Prepped. You can do that by going to the lower right-hand corner, clicking on the house for your project manager, and right-clicking anywhere in the blank space and selecting Import Project. And in our work files, we downloaded under Projects, 4B VFX Prepped.drp is what we're looking for. Select that and import it. And it should pop up here, double click to open. And if any of this media doesn't relink, go up to the media pool in the upper left-hand corner, select all of these folders, right click and say relink clips for selected bins. Go to the work files, select media and hit select folder and everything should relink and just be awesome. Close our media pool and zoom out here. Your project should look something like this, and we're going to start talking about VFX with actually our fourth shot in, which is our muzzle flash. This is at 2 minutes and 25 seconds and 5 frames. That's where this marker is. We have notes in all of these markers for things that we want to do. What we're going to be doing is adding some gun effects to this fake gun to make it actually not just look really hokey. Again, if you've never used Fusion before, definitely recommend checking out some of my basic Fusion tutorials on YouTube, but we are going to take stuff really slow to start, especially in this lesson. We're going to do a little intro for Fusion. So let's start with this shot. The way that we get this into Fusion to actually start working with it is just make sure that we're over the shot here in the timeline, and then just click on the Fusion page down below. And what that'll do is swap into the Fusion page and open up our shot. So let's take a tour of the interface here. First of all, probably the most obvious is that we have our shot here kind of in the upper right. This is our right-hand viewer. This is very similar to the viewer in the edit page, how we have two viewers, but it is a little different because the edit page, this is always what the person who watches your project is going to see. And the source viewer on the left is a way to just preview media, right? So if I double click, I can preview stuff here that's not actually added to the sequence that people aren't actually going to see, but I can kind of preview it here. And this is always what people will see when they watch our film. In Fusion, it's sort of a similar idea, but both of these viewers act like the source viewer. So what is playing here or here is not necessarily what people are going to see. It's basically just two opportunities to look at a part of what we're doing. And we'll go over that a little bit more in a minute. That should make a little bit more sense. But for now, this is what people will see. This is what is going to be sent back to the timeline, but it's not always this way. Towards the right, we have our inspector. This works pretty much the exact same way as it does in the edit page. So anytime that you have something selected and you open up the inspector in the edit page, you can adjust properties of it. And the same thing happens in Fusion. Anytime that you have something selected, you can adjust properties of it, right? So if I select these different nodes down here, which we'll talk about in a second, I can adjust properties here in the inspector. So those are a couple things that are kind of like the edit page. Another couple things that are sort of like the edit page is in the upper left-hand corner here. We can open our media pool, and that works exactly like the edit page. And the effects library, same thing. It's just a bunch of effects that we can drag onto certain things. And we can open and close those panels with those buttons up here. And all that stuff is a lot like the edit page and the other pages of Resolve. Down below here, we have this timeline, and we can scrub through our shot. We also have these two yellow little ticks, and these are the beginning and the end of the shot as it sits in the timeline. So we can actually look at the shot before our in point and after our out point. But the only thing that we're actually going to be working with is this kind of lighter gray section in between these two yellow ticks. This is really important because it's really easy to just get lost and like be working down here and, you know, you do an effect or something and you're like, why isn't it showing up? Well, it's because it only shows up within this range. So right below this, we have our transport controls. We can play stuff back. And by default, it loops. We also have a couple numbers here on the left. This is your in and your out point. And towards the right, this is your current frame. So we're at frame 235. Most of the time when you're doing VFX work like this that takes a shot from a timeline, you aren't really going to have to mess with these that much, but it's good to know that what they are and why they're there. Down below those things, we have our toolbar. And these are some of the most common tools and effects that are used inside of Fusion. Chances are a lot of the stuff that you're going to want to do is going to be accessible on this toolbar here. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, because before we even go over that, we need to talk about nodes. So nodes can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you've never worked with them before. But all it really is a flowchart of what you want to change about an image. Okay. If you've ever done like mind mapping or, made kind of different workflows for any other application, it works kind of the same way. Basically, each one of these boxes is called a node, and a node generally will do one thing. It has one job. The job of this node right here is to load some media. So what this is doing is taking our clip from the timeline and it's bringing it into Fusion. That's all this node does. And then this second node, all it does is take whatever we've done in Fusion and it sends that back to the timeline. It renders it out. So these are two steps, two instructions, and they're linked together with an arrow, and it generally flows from left to right. So what we're doing is kind of building instructions here with these little steps called nodes. So right now we have a pretty simple instruction. All we're doing is saying, let's grab this piece of media, and then nothing happens, do nothing with it, and then put it back into the timeline. And that's exactly what we're doing. If we go back to the edit page, nothing's happened to our shot. Yay! So let's say that we want to do something to it. The easiest way to probably explain this is with a blur. So up here in our toolbar, remember these are some of the most common tools. I'll click this little arrow by the inspector to give us a little bit more room with our nodes. If I take this blur and I click and drag it into our flow here, then what this does is one job. It blurs things. And for this to do anything, it needs to be hooked up to these nodes. So one way to do that is if you mouse over one of these connections to where it's blue and you click on it, it will disappear. Then you can grab this little gray square. This is the output of a node, and drag it and drop it onto our blur, and grab the output of our blur and drag it onto the media out. And now this is connected, which means that it will actually blur things. So if we go up to our shot here, we'll zoom in just so we can see a little bit. It is blurring this just a little bit. And again, whatever we have selected, we can adjust the properties for in the inspector. So we can boost up this blur size, and now we make this really, really blurry, right? So we have a really simple effect. We're grabbing a piece of media, we're blurring it, and we're putting it back on the timeline. Let's just double check. If we click on edit, the shot is really blurry on the timeline. That means that whatever we're doing in Fusion is actually coming back to the timeline, and whatever effects we do are going to show up in our edit. So let's go back to Fusion. And you notice this is really cool because we can switch back and forth in between editing, looking at our video, and working on our effects just by clicking to the Fusion page. This is a lot different than other workflows, other apps, where you have to actually export a shot out to a specific program and work on it and then export it and bring it back. And it's just kind of a big hassle to work in between, where here it's like 1 second, right? So that's kind of the general idea, is that every node does something and they have to be connected to each other in order to actually affect the image. And you aren't going to see anything in our edit if it's not connected to the media out node. Remember, this is what sends things back to the timeline. So again, if I had my blur and it wasn't connected to anything, it just doesn't do anything, right? It has to be connected. If this makes sense so far, you're going to be in really good shape. Even if you're new to compositing, we're going to go really slow. And before we really dive in here, we're going to make a little adjustment to our viewer to make sure that we can get some predictable results when we actually composite things. In the upper right-hand corner of our right viewer, there's a little grid, and this is where you load a LUT. Now, when you load a LUT here, all it's really going to do is preview certain colors. It's not going to affect how the image actually looks in the edit. This is just kind of a way to preview what it sort of looks like in the edit. So what we're going to do, kind of like we did with the color page in the last lesson, is we're going to click this little drop down and go down to Blackmagic Design and scroll down to Blackmagic Pocket 6K Film to Video V4. And look what happens. That will preview our color grade here, again, so that things aren't so flat and desaturated. They actually have decent colors and everything. And this is just so we have a pretty good idea of what our colors will sort of look like when we color grade. Because everything that you do in Fusion happens on the original file and then is put into the edit page. And then when we go to the color page, it's color over that. It's over everything. So we kind of have to estimate what the colors will look like. And you'll notice if you look closely, these colors here aren't exactly like the colors in our edit. They're a little bit different, but it's close enough to kind of get into a ballpark of what we want for our composite. So that's what we're going to do, is have that LUT on our right viewer the whole time.